Welcome to the Arsenic Theory channel. Today I'm going to continue with the book club, the book published by Galton Darwin called The Next Million Years. And today we're going to talk about, or I should read, chapter 2 called The Population. Right now I'm going to actually grab a sip of kvass. For those of you who don't know, kvass is a kind of Russian traditional drink. Very good. So I actually made it myself. It's basically a fermented drink. You know, I make it with bread, yeast, and sugar. That's all it takes. And water, of course. That's the main ingredient. For those of you that tried it and liked it, I have some news. I'm going to make some more. So right now I'm going to indulge before I start reading chapter 2. Because, you know, with this kind of heavy material, I gotta have enough fermented material in myself to handle it. All right. So, and before I start reading chapter 2 of The Next Million Years, I just wanted to give kind of brief introduction to the population question in general. So, from the times of Thomas Malthus, for those of you who don't know, Thomas Malthus was a British kind of, I guess, scientist of that time. He was a scholar, and he's the one who kind of, one of the first to introduce this idea that there is a correlation between population growth and, the overall food supply, and that if the population growth will run amok, it will basically, the peoples of the Europe at that time will run out of food, and there'll be chaos and famine and disease on the streets, so-called Malthusian catastrophe, right? So he wrote a book, this guy Thomas Malthus, in 1798. It was called An Essay on the Principle of Population, and pretty much he started this trend in a scientific and kind of scholarly community, academic community, I should say, of the thing of population being a problem. So if you pick up any later books published by either eugenicists or bioethicists or any kind of scientist who examines, the socio-political, questions of society, you will notice that every single one of them has a chapter on population, either population control or population problem, too many people, too many problems, so to speak. You can grab, Ecosystem, the textbook written by Paul Ehrlich, I believe. Let me check. Ecosystem, some of you maybe have heard about it. Ecosystem. Maybe not. Ecoscience, that's it, Ecoscience. Ecoscience. All right. Yes, it was called Ecoscience, written by Paul Ehrlich. I was correct. Population, Resources, and Environment, in which he examines all sorts of ecological, sociological, aspects of the world, and then, offers prescription to them. If you read the book called The First Global Revolution by Bertrand Schneider, if you read the book by, let's say, Aldous Huxley, A Brave New World Revisited, which is a non-fiction version of the Brave New World, where he looks at the Brave World scenario, which he had outlined in the 30s, and looks back at it, 20 plus years from when he wrote it, and sees how society progressed, and if it's near that Brave World scenario as he had envisioned it to be. So in the latest forecasting book, like I said, 2052, the book by European scientists, he says that the population will peak by the year 2050 and they will start plummeting. Fertility rates have been going down consistently, decade after decade. Therefore, it eventually will hit the fan, so to speak, and the population will start plummeting. And maybe for other reasons too, who knows, maybe the planet really cannot sustain that many people, who knows. But in any case, so this is kind of quick intro on the topic of population. So now let's delve into what Charles Galton Darwin has to say about population. Chapter 2. The central guiding theme that must run through all considerations of history is the question of population, and there is a difference here between future history and past history. The fundamental question is survival, and this must never be forgotten. Some are attacked by beasts of prey, some by parasites, some by pestilences, while some whole races of animals have been destroyed by catastrophes, such as the submergence of land under the sea. It is food that, in the end, determines the population of the world. All right, now let's have a sip of kvass, the Russian traditional drink, made by me. Very good, very refreshing. Has some alcohol content in it, not that much, but in any case. So a couple of things that came to my mind while I was reading, this chapter 2. In 1960s or 70s, I believe, I can, take a look while I'm talking here. There was a book published called The Population Bomb. And it, talked about, ad nauseum, this correlation between population and food supply, that if there is, population will be growing exponentially, there'll just not be enough food to sustain it. So let's see when it was published. The Population Bomb, also by Paul Ehrlich, actually, the same dude that wrote the Ecoscience. So it was published in 1968. It's a short book. I suggest for anybody interested in the subject to read it. But in any case, so what happened in 1970s is the so-called Green Revolution that revolutionized the whole system of making food, the agricultural sector. And companies started using pesticides, herbicides, all sorts of other fertilizers in order to increase the yield. So the United States was able to avoid this population bomb that was described by Paul Ehrlich, because they were able to just produce enough food to sustain this growing population. So perhaps, if you are going to grow to this 20 billion, probably not going to reach that. But let's say if you do reach, the 20 billion population mark around the world, I'm sure there'll be some other, revolutions that will happen in terms of food supply that will greatly increase the yield. Because as you can see in the breakthroughs that happened with genetics recently and biochemistry, we are able to now create food out of nothing. We can take some stem cells and build the entire steak of meat, just growing it in a lab, using just couple of few cells, or scientists know better how to describe it. But in any case, we actually have humans have that capacity to create food out of nothing, and we can feed the poor, starving populations of the world by using this kind of method. So we can perhaps also avoid another population bomb that will be in the future, even though the population will start plummeting. But in any case, so these were kind of my thoughts. Now let's continue. Malthus himself and others after him tried to devise ways of escape from this threat, but it has never been really disposed of, and it has only escaped the predominating attention it deserved through the accident of the history of the 19th century. It was verified that the increase in population tended during that period to be in geometrical progression, but the development of the New World and the establishment of railways and steamships to carry its products to the Old World had the unforeseen consequence that for the best part of a century, the cultivated areas could increase at a rate greater than the population. It follows that in the very long run of 1,000,000 years, the general course of future history is most of the time likely to be what it has been for the most of past time: a continual pressure of population on its means of subsistence, with the margin of the population unable to survive. So as you can see, even after Thomas Malthus wrote his monumental essay on the problem of population growth, He was then not necessarily disproven, but have you heard of the expression called necessity is the mother of invention? Well, here's how it is. When humans are faced with the graving problem, in this case starvation and pestilence, they will create something to overcome it. So in the case of the 19th century, what happened, instead of, starving to death from lack of food, they actually, humans have come up with all sorts of inventions. Let's not forget, the New World exploded in numbers with the immigration from the Old World, that is, currently Europe, to the New World, that is United States. So partially the population problem was solved through immigration out of European countries across the Atlantic to the US, and also with the invention of railways and steamships to carry products to the Old World that had been produced in the US and etc. Right? So in the 20th century, after the population bomb was published by Paul Ehrlich and on a public platform, what happened in the 1970s was the agricultural revolution, the so-called Green Revolution, that increased the yield by 10-fold, 20, 30-fold, depending on the type of crop that they were applying it to. With the use of new chemicals, fertilizers, the agricultural yields have increased across the board, which again was able to resolve this population issue. The same thing now. There'll probably be two situations that will occur that once again will address the population concerns of the 21st century. In my estimation, it's going to be the natural decline due to the due to the decreasing fertility rates and the aging of the population. And a second thing, there'll be another agricultural revolution in terms of biochemistry and genetic engineering. Our insight into the matter has further been confused by the fact that at the present time we are threatened with a decreasing population in England, and indeed in many of the countries inhabited by the white races. This is a very important phenomenon indeed, and it seems to contradict Malthus's principles. And with that said, let me take another sip of the Russian traditional drink kvass. It's paradise. I have already pointed out that though the availability of food is the fundamental question for mankind, there is also the important question of the competition for that food between men and between nations. It will be those who are successful in a competition who will make up the population of the future. And so it is the qualities that lead to this success which will determine the course of future history. And since so this is the end of chapter 2. And since Charles Galton Darwin regards intellect as one of the most important or distinguishing characteristics of the human race, I would like to make one comment and kind of go back to what I had spoke earlier about in regards to the Green Revolution of the 1970s and kind of industrial revolution of the 19th centuries that helped, or the machinery, that appeared in the 19th century. All these things have helped human beings as a race to overcome these problems. In this case, it's overpopulation. And therefore, there is a hope for mankind that necessity will breed innovation and help us create tools for our toolbox to overcome these problems. So once again, chapter 2 is completed, and up to the next time, thank you for listening to the Arsenic Theory channel. Don't forget to subscribe, put some likes and comments below. Have a good day.